Hello. Welcome to this candidate debate, sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Marin County. My name is Lori Nardone, and our timekeeper is Annie Laser. The two candidates with us today are each running to fill the position of Marin County Superior Court Judge. They are Mike Cofino and Sheila Lichtblau. The candidates have been invited to each make a 2-minute opening statement. We'll begin with Mike Cofino, followed by Sheila Lichtblau.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having us here in this TV studio. The last League of Women Voters event was in Marin City, and there were many more candidates than there are now. We're down to 2 people in a runoff election, and voters will have a chance to decide which of the 2 of us to elect as Marin's next judge on November 8th. So maybe just to start with a little bit about my background. I'm from New York City, but my family moved to Marin County in the early 1970s, and I grew up in Mill Valley. My aunt and uncle ran a bakery there that was called True Confections Bakery. A lot of people still have fond memories of it. My mom was a high school teacher. She taught English and French. And I went to Tam High and graduated in 1986. I went on to college and law school. And right now what I do for work is I am a deputy public defender here in Marin County. The way that I got to that position is a little bit unusual. I've been a lawyer for 20 years, but only for the past 15 have I done indigent defense work. And that's because in 2001, I left a corporate law job in Oakland to go to the poorest county in California to work as a public defender. And that was in Lake County, which was about 100 miles north of where I was living at that time. And in doing that, I really found my calling as a lawyer. And for the past 15 years, I have decided to apply whatever learning I've acquired in school, my hard work, and my skill to helping those people in our legal system who are the most disadvantaged. That kind of career shift came about because while I was working as a civil lawyer, representing businesses and corporations and other kinds of commercial disputes, I handled a pro bono asylum case for a man from Chile who was facing political persecution in his home country. And I was able to get him status in the United States and asylum here. And that made me feel like I'd like to use my legal skills to help real people who were facing peril. And so that's what I've done for the past 13 years here in Marin County as a deputy public defender. What that means is that under our constitutional system, people who are charged with crimes have the right to the assistance of counsel. And even if you can't afford a lawyer, you're entitled to one under our system of constitutional justice. In that position, I help all kinds of different people with their legal problems. And frightening as the legal system may be and confusing, my job is to try to help those people defend their constitutional rights and try to ensure that only guilty people in our system get convicted of crimes. So those are some of the background and skills and experiences that I hope to bring to the bench here in Marin County as a judge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Sheila?
Yes. Thank you, Women League of Voters, for allowing us this opportunity to speak before you and to talk about our qualifications. My name is Sheila Lichtblau. I'm running for the seat to be vacated by Judge Diopel, who some of you may know, who ran 12 years ago. I'm incredibly honored that she has endorsed me for her seat, along with every endorsing judge on the Marin Superior Court and all 5 county supervisors. For me, the reason why I'm so interested in this position and running is because I really want to serve the community here in Marin County. And service to the community is something that was really imbued in me as a child. I'm a child of immigrant parents. My father came here from India. He grew up in Bombay during World War II and during the independence movement from Great Britain. And he had the wonderful opportunity of going down to the beaches of Bombay with his father, getting on the shoulders of his father, and listening to those speeches of Mahatma Gandhi, who talked about service and who talked about equality. And so he would talk to me about that when I was a little girl growing up. My mother, her name is Margarita Sotomayor. She's from Puerto Rico. And she grew up in Puerto Rico during the Depression in a single-parent home. just her mother and her two sisters, and all of them talked about actually serving their community. My grandmother, who I refer to as my abuelita, she was a teacher for kids in the neighborhood. And my mother became a teacher as well, and ended up serving other parts of the island outside of San Juan where she grew up. And so she served her community that way. And so growing up, my background was extremely multicultural, and it was also imbued with this sense that, you know, we really need to serve our communities. So when I was in college, I had the opportunity to meet a man named Frank Newman. He's a former California Supreme Court Justice who decided to retire and actually devote his career to teaching human rights law at UC Berkeley and to working on human rights issues. And so I went with him to the United Nations, and on 2 occasions I was at the Subcommission for Human Rights in Geneva, Switzerland, working with him on those issues. And that for me was when the light bulb came on in terms of really how I could serve my community through the law. So I went to law school, and after that I ended up doing human rights work here at home, where I represented the poor and disabled on housing issues, on getting basic benefits, access to medical care. I subsequently ended up being working at a law firm, a large law firm nationwide, where I was elevated to partner ahead of schedule and became the only female partner at the time. And for the last 10 years, I've been serving the county of Marin as its county council and serving it in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Interesting backgrounds, both of you. So let's start with, Sheila, we'll start with you.
Sure.
What do you see as the biggest problem facing the Marin County court system?
Well, I think there are certainly a lot of different issues that could be strengthened, and I'll talk about just a couple where I would like to see them strengthened. One of them is restorative justice. I think we have a wonderful restorative justice program where we have youth court, we have community courts, we have the STAR program for the mentally ill, we have drug court, and this is an alternative way of dealing with problems that arise when we have offenders in our society. And I would like to see those strengthened. They are wonderful programs working right now, but as judges, I think judges need to be enthusiastic and give energy to those programs. There is one program that actually I'd like to see reinstated, and that's the DUI courts, because we have a real problem here with substance abuse amongst our youth in Marin County. And DUI courts was one of the ways in which the court would go to the high schools, or the high schools would sometimes come to the court and serve as an advisory jury, and this would give high school students an opportunity to really understand the consequences of drinking and driving. So that's one of the things that I would really like to see reinstated. The other couple things that I would like our courts to think about is really access to seniors. We have more seniors in this county than any other county in the state of California. And so we have a legal self-help services clinic within the courthouse, but that really only deals with family law, and I would love to see it expanded to the extent possible to deal with senior issues, because the number of seniors is actually growing in Marin County. So, and then the last thing that I am very sensitive to is cultural competency. Being a child of immigrant parents, a Spanish speaker, I understand and I know that when we have cultural competency in our courts, meaning we have judges who are sensitive to cultural competency, that are sensitive to those various issues that might arise, that are not so, that can be very subtle. For example, the way somebody who is Latino might interpret something that somebody is saying, even if they can speak English. I speak Spanish, and I've had the opportunity, because I serve currently as a judge pro tem, and I've had the opportunity to actually use my Spanish. And I'm also very sensitive to the various issues, not only in the Latino culture, but also in the South Asian culture. The other thing that comes up a lot is, we need to, along with all of this, make sure that we are resolving cases, because we want to make sure that there isn't a backlog of cases. And so I am really in favor of resolving cases where we can, making sure that cases don't end up dragging out. for years and years, and where we can use judges to serve as a settlement judge, I'm all in favor of that. Thank you.
Thank you. You're touching on about 4 questions that I'm going to get to, so I'll let you go into deeper detail. So Mike, and what do you see as the biggest problem facing the Marin County system?
Well, I don't know that we have problems per se. I don't see it as problems. I mean, every courthouse across our state sees issues that are similar to some extent. And I guess one of those perhaps to touch on just at the beginning, because it affects Marin County just as it affects every other county in California, is the relationship of immigration and immigration issues with criminal law. And as a public defender, a lot of what I do is represent people who are both accused of a crime here in Marin, but who also face the possibility of deportation because they don't have legal status in this country and because their criminal case might result in their being deported. And judges have an important role to play in making sure that a law that was just passed last year in California is followed. And to some extent, Marin has been a little bit slow in catching up with the requirements of that law, which were that the California legislature has said that it's very important for district attorneys' offices to consider the very serious immigration consequences that can occur to somebody as a result of their criminal case, and to take those considerations, take those factors into consideration when resolving cases. So as a public defender, that's one of the things that we try to work on. And for example, the legislature has said that there are, they said that 50,000 people in the last 2 years had been deported just from California alone. Now, what the legislature said was basically that there are very severe consequences when a person is deported. For example, if you're in an immigration detention center, you generally don't have the right to bail, meaning that you're going to be in custody and detained, whether or not you're properly to be deported or not. And you also don't have the right to counsel. And so I think that one of the things that our courts and our district attorney's office and public defender and other criminal practitioners can try to emphasize more in the future is to ensure that this particular statute, which is called Penal Code 1016.2, is followed. Because when a person is deported, they obviously face the potential for serious harm in their home country. But I think the other challenge that's facing our courts, which is an issue in this election, is that of all the 9 Bay Area counties, we don't have any judge on our bench who previously worked as an indigent defender, as I have. And one of the things that I think is important is to make sure that the composition of the judiciary is reflective of different kinds of professional backgrounds. And at this point, what we're really lacking is any judge on the bench who ever spent his or her career, as I have, sitting next to or standing next to an accused person and ensuring that that person's constitutional rights are respected. And I think that that's an important thing that I would bring to the bench here.
Thank you. And I don't want to offend either of you, but I think sometimes people don't pay attention to who's running for judge. And so the question is, and I'll start with you on this one, we're going to go back and forth, is why should this election be important to voters?
Well, I think it's important to voters, for one thing, because of what I mentioned in my last answer, and that is that the vast majority of criminal defendants coming through the Marin County court system are indigent defendants, people who are represented by the public defender. That means that they're poor people who are accused of crimes, and yet they cannot afford a lawyer. And none of those people here in Marin ever gets to appear in front of a judge who devoted his or her career to the defense of the indigent in criminal cases. Now, the reason that I think this is important, among others, is that judges obviously occupy positions of great power in our government. And their decisions, when they exercise that power, have real consequences for individuals, for people and their families, and for the communities that those people live in. And I think that what you gain as a public defender is a really deep understanding of the lives of individuals in our community, and generally the people who are the poorer side, of which there are many in Marin, surprisingly. And I think that that's a very valuable perspective to have. Unfortunately, as I said before, the 12 judges that currently sit on our bench, while they're fine jurists, all of them, none of them has the experience that I have, which is getting to know a varied group of individuals by representing them in their criminal cases. And when I say getting to know them, I mean getting to know their families and their cultures and the communities that they come from. And this includes teens and elders, military veterans, immigrants, and many people with mental illness. And the kind of understanding that one gains in working with this population for years and years, as I have, 15 years, is, I think, an extremely valuable one when it comes to knowing as a judge what it is that your decisions are going to do to an actual person and their community. So I believe that's a valuable asset.
Thank you. Sheila.
Sure. So I think the question was really why should the public care about this judicial election? And it's interesting because if you talk to people, they'll ask that question, and they talk about, well, how would it affect me? Because I'm usually not going to end up in court unless I go for jury duty. But it does affect a wide variety of people in different ways. For example, we know that there are planning decisions that are made that affect housing for people here in Marin County. We know that there are issues here that affect zoning, sustainable agriculture. So many different types of issues are decided in this county from decisions that affect foodies, such as the oyster dispute, to decisions that affect flooding, to decisions that, like I said, affect it can anything, pensions, so many different issues. And so it is something that I think that the public really does need to be aware of. And I've had the wonderful opportunity to in fact work on so many of these issues that actually affect Marin County. Sustainable agriculture. I've served as a facilitator for housing issues, flooding, and education issues. And so I've had that opportunity to really see how the court system actually certainly does affect the people of Marin County. And I have the experience to be able to really connect in that way. I currently serve as a judge pro tem, and so I actually hear the small claims court cases. And I do get to see the people that come before me and have that opportunity to listen to what they say. And I truly believe that it is imperative that we have a judge with judicial experience, such as myself, and a broad-based experience, not just representing the poor and disabled, as I have for years and actually continue to do on a pro bono basis, but also small businesses, large businesses, governmental entities, and school. So you get a balanced judge. Thank you.
Thank you. So Sheila, we'll let you answer this
Sure.
next one first.
Okay.
What role do judges play in making jury duty a positive experience?
Jury duty actually, I've had the opportunity and the honor of serving on jury duty before, all the way through to verdict. And it is a wonderful experience to be able to really participate in the system. There is a judge whose name is Terry Boren. He's a criminal judge, and he's one of the judges who's endorsed me for judge. And he does a wonderful thing when he calls jurors into service. And what he does is he puts up a slideshow, and he said, and it's a picture, it's a slide of a beach. It's a photograph of a beach, and he tells everybody, I'll bet you all would like to be here. It's a beautiful beach, isn't it gorgeous? And then he tells them, well, but in fact, this beach is the beach where Americans landed to basically save France, and during World War II, and so this is a beach in Normandy. And it really gets people thinking. And he starts telling them, these people really served. And what I'm asking you to do is provide a little bit of your service as well. It's a wonderful way to get people thinking about this honor they have of actually serving as a jury member, and really finding that their participation can be meaningful in really listening to testimony and really coming to those hard decisions that jury members have to make every day in the courtroom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I have a very good understanding of the impact of jury service on Marin County citizens who come for jury service, not because I've sat as a juror myself or been called, but because I myself have been the lawyer on over 50 jury trials. And I have quite good familiarity with how the jury trial process works and how painful it can be to be called as a juror during that tedious hours and days that it takes to pick a jury. It's a very important part of our system. I do think it can be improved, however, for jurors. And as a criminal practitioner, I basically spend my career in the courtroom. And the jury trial is the kind of highest expression of our justice system. It's the place where people's due process rights are really vindicated and where justice takes place. And we have a wonderful system with the jury system because basically what the founders decided was that ordinary people, unconnected with government, should be the ones to whom the decision is submitted whether a person can be deprived of his life, liberty, or property. And so jurors fulfill an extremely important function in our democracy, but the process of getting on a jury ought to be less painful. And one of the solutions that I think works well, in my experience, is to have people that have hardships, and that's a legitimate excuse why you cannot serve on a jury. Those people ought to have their hardships heard before they go through the metal detectors and that long line before you even get on the court floor. At least one of our judges has used that practice, and it's much more efficient in separating out those who are going to be able to serve on that case from those who cannot. Now, Ms. Lichtblau is familiar with the process in Judge Boren's court because she sat as a prospective juror in a jury trial that I was doing in a very serious case that took some weeks to resolve. What I think is important in our next judge is that that judge have extensive trial and courtroom experience, as I have. There's no substitute for that. And the ability to manage a court calendar, to make on-the-spot rulings on evidence and law, to know the value of a case, to know how to deal with difficult personalities, those are things you gain in the courtroom and in the courtroom alone, acting as a lawyer.
Thank you. We'll start with Mike for the next question. How would you define an activist judge, and what do you think of judicial activism?
Well, the term activist judge is typically applied to appellate court judges. And the idea has to do with the separation of powers, which is the model on which our whole government structure is based. Obviously, judges are in the judicial branch, and their role is to apply the law and to make sure that the law is followed, not to write laws, not to make policy. And so activist judges are sometimes considered to be those judges, typically on appellate courts, but I guess sometimes on trial courts as well, who view their role as being something beyond applying the law and making sure the law is followed. Now that's a kind of simplistic view of the division of labor between our legislative and judicial branches, because judges, of course, exercise discretion, meaning that they have an ability to make decisions within the bounds of applying the law. And it's those exercises of discretion that we really care about in our judges, and that's why we take so much trouble to evaluate the qualifications of judges or of people that want to become judges, because it really goes beyond calling balls and strikes. And probably the most important qualification that you want to look for in a judge is a person who has spent a lot of time in the courtroom, as I have. Thousands and thousands of courtroom hours, thousands of clients, and as I said, over 50 jury trials. The reason that's important is that trial judges do their work in the courtroom. And unless you've seen it done 100 times, kind of witnessed and participated in the life of the courtroom, it would be very difficult to come into a busy trial court like we have here in Marin County and be effective. Be effective in doing things like managing the flow of cases. And frankly, if people's hearings are continued to another day or another week, that's a form of injustice, because delay occasioned by a judge who's not managing the calendar efficiently really inconveniences the parties, the lawyers, and everybody involved in a case.
Thank you.
Yes, so an activist judge is somebody who doesn't, as I understand it, is this idea that somebody's not going to follow the law. And it's an interesting concept because as judicial officers, judges are supposed to, in fact, apply the law, but in doing so, they actually have to listen to different perspectives. They have to listen to the perspective of two parties and then decide, using the law, which is the correct perspective. I think there's no better experience that somebody can have in actually making those decisions than actually judging itself. The experience of a judge actually serving as a judge is really the most important qualification. And then that's something that I've done. I've certainly presided over many, many trials and had to weigh evidence, had to really assess credibility. And so in addition to my trial experience in state and federal court, I also bring that added perspective of having had to judge cases. But really, what is also incredibly important is that you come to the bench with a broad-based perspective, not somebody who actually wants to come to the bench with a particular voice. And this is where I tend to differ from my colleague, Mr. Cofino, because he talks about bringing a particular voice into the courtroom. And that to me signals a particular interest in serving a particular role, and that is of representing one particular view. I don't want to bring a particular voice. I want to make sure that everyone has an equal voice. And that's why my experience, having represented the poor and disabled for many years, small and large businesses, the state, the county, and governmental entities, schools, is so important, because the more perspectives we have, the more we tend to think not in black and white, but in technicolor.
Thank you. Okay, Sheila, we'll start with you for this one.
Sure.
And you touched on this a little bit earlier.
Sure.
What do you feel causes a backlog of cases, civil and criminal, and what can judges do to move the process along so trials aren't taking so long and people aren't on juries forever and the whole process?
Right. Particularly in civil cases, there are so many ways in which the parties can, frankly, delay the process. Sometimes it's caused by, just a judge can only hear so many cases. But a lot of times you can have one party that actually seeks to delay it, unfortunately, because perhaps they believe that by delaying the process, it will cause more money to be spent and somebody to change their view as to how they want to resolve the case. And so one of the things that the court has done, and I would really like to see continued and strengthened, is the work of trying to resolve cases early. Because especially in civil cases, you will find that cases go on and on and on. It's not unusual to have a case lingering for a few years. Not all cases, but certainly some of them. And so, we would like to make sure that the wheels of justice turn not so slowly. And so by doing that, we can really increase our efforts to try and have the cases resolved. I currently serve as the federal mediator, which means that I serve on the panel of attorneys that serves as a mediator for the U.S. district courts. And in that capacity, I've had plenty of opportunity to really do what a judge needs to do when serving as a settlement judge, which is to really listen and to have that specific training, that mediation training that is so important. And so I look to bring that particular skill into the courtroom as a judge.
Thank you.
Well, judges have an important role to play in helping the lawyers settle cases, and that's both on the civil side and on the criminal side. The whole goal of our legal system, really, and the point of having judges, is to try to promote regularity and predictability in our legal system. Business owners want to have a good sense of how a dispute is going to get resolved before they go to court, before they expend the money and the time to actually have a trial. And so when judges meet with lawyers, they have an important part to play in giving those lawyers some indication of where they believe the value of their case lies in the kind of continuum of similar cases that judge has seen in his or her career. Now, continuances, in other words, delays of a case to another court date down the line, should only be granted by judges where there's good cause. Now, there's often very good reasons why good cause exists, and the whole point is to make sure that the parties are prepared, that they've brought the merits and the facts of their case forward in an adequate way before they're going to have a contested hearing or a trial. But knowing the value of a case is something that is very important in a judge, because if a judge does not know the value of a case, if a judge has not seen enough of that particular kind of case, then that judge doesn't know where in the kind of spectrum of cases this particular case falls. And that's where it's important to have the kind of experience that I have spending my time in the courtroom, which gives me a good sense, as I said, based on the kind of data set of information that I have, how serious a particular crime is, how serious a particular offender is. That's important when you're setting bail and when you're talking about sentencing and when you're talking with the parties about how the case is likely to be resolved, both on the criminal and the civil side.
Thank you. So Mike, we'll start with you for this one. So in Marin, family court has been the focus of some criticism, some of it a little bit anguished. How do you think the family court is functioning now?
Well, family court is probably the one courtroom in our courthouse where emotions run the highest and where people feel in a kind of innate sense that their dispute is of extraordinary importance. You're talking about child custody issues, child visitation issues, taking a child away from a parent, divorce, and that sort of thing. I only appear in family court here in Marin when my criminal clients have a related family court matter. For example, if their spouse or their intimate partner is trying to get a restraining order, or if they are trying to get custody of a child. And the family court, unlike some of our other courts here, has a very well elaborated process for resolving those cases outside of the courtroom before they're forced to go to hearings. And while there has been criticism of our family courts, I guess for being partisan to some extent, I salute their effort to have compelled mediation in order that the parties can kind of sit down together and try to talk out a resolution before the matter has to go in front of a judge. So I would think that that's a model that could actually be applied in some of our other courts. In our civil division, it does exist to some extent. In the criminal division, it's basically non-existent. It's kind of up to the parties to try to arrive at a resolution before preliminary hearing or before trial.
Thank you.
So it's interesting because when I go out into the community and I talk to people, I do hear a lot of anguish about people who have appeared in family court and who have had results that are that they are not pleased with. And I think the really the most important thing when I talk to these people is really their feeling about wanting to be heard. And I think that our courts do a pretty good job generally, but it is really made me think about this issue of how important it is to be heard. I had a case recently that was in fact outside of the Marin Superior Court where I had somebody who was very, very emotionally charged, and the judge was so good that at the end of the proceeding, the judge made his decision, which went against this individual, and the individual still said that he felt satisfied by the process, even though he didn't like the result, because he felt heard. And that to me really has made me think about how important it is that even if we disagree with the ruling, if we come away from it feeling as though the judge listened to us, the judge had the right temperament to hear what we were saying, that you're satisfied with the process. And so, I think that we try and do that in family court, but I think because we're talking about decisions that are so important to people, taking away of children, divorce, these issues are so emotional, we really need to be very sensitive to making sure that people, even though they're going to disagree with the ruling, really, really feel heard. And that's something that I really hope to bring as a judge with my mediation background, with my broad-based perspective of actually having to have served so many different types of people and individuals, because it really is important at the end of the day. When we think about some of those cases where judges made some comments that were that really stuck with people, how that let them feel at the end.
Thank you. Okay, we have time for a few more questions. So Sheila, we'll start with you. What about alternatives to incarceration? So do you think they're effective, including being cost effective? And could the court be using these alternatives more than they currently do?
So I talked about this briefly in my opening, and today in response to other questions. We have what we call restorative justice, and we have that with regard to all different sectors, frankly. With our youth, we have our youth court, which is run by Don Carney. It's a wonderful program. We have the STAR courts, we have the drug courts. the community court, and let me just touch very briefly on a couple of them. The youth court, because I really think that this plays into our justice system. Studies have shown really that just incarcerating people is not an answer that is going to work in terms of not just the person's life, but their family, and really the rehabilitation that ends up not coming out of it. Because if you incarcerate somebody and then you let them out, the question is, well, what is that person going to do when they're released? So we have to look for different solutions. And this isn't something that's unique to Marin County. This is something that actually has been going on nationwide. Another way of really getting to the problem, solving the problem, and frankly, making sure it doesn't happen again. So let me just talk about our youth courts, which are so important because we do have this incredible substance abuse problem in Marin County, which is so unfortunate. The youth court serves to take high school kids who are first offenders, first-time offenders, or who get caught, for example, using drugs at school or something like that, and it gives them the opportunity to go before a jury of their own peers. And in doing that, they have to admit their guilt. They get educated on so many of the dangers of substance abuse, and it's been so successful. And so that's something that I really want to strengthen. The other thing is community court, and that is actually a court that is here in downtown San Rafael that serves the people. And it's so holistic in its approach because we have so many people willing to actually offer different services in community court. And it's a way of using community service to actually deal with offenses as well, for minor offenses.
There's growing recognition, I guess, across the country that incarceration is not the only solution to criminal sentencing. And in fact, it's counterproductive in many cases. I believe that incarceration, and I think many judges have the same perspective, should be reserved only for people who are to some extent beyond the power of rehabilitation. And in California, there has been a lot of legislation to try to divert people out of our prison system and into our jails where hopefully they can receive better services. One of the things that I do as a lawyer, and we do at the Public Defender's Office, is practice what we call holistic representation, which has to do with going beyond the immediate legal problems faced by our clients to the underlying social conditions that might have led them to getting arrested, such as untreated mental illness, drug addiction, homelessness. And we don't want our clients to get rearrested any more than anybody else does. And so what we try to do, and I've tried to get my clients into rehabilitation programs and mental health treatment programs, alternatives to being in a jail cell where they're really not being productive and in general not really receiving services that are going to help them. Now, some people are too much of a danger to the community and need to go to jail, and in some instances need to go to prison. Now, judges often in criminal cases are in a position of having to make a sentencing decision. Do I send this person to prison or do I give them a chance at probation? And as a kind of frontline public defender working with clients, you develop a street sense about whether somebody is serious about wanting to change. I've represented many, many clients in San Quentin State Prison, and in the course of representing those people, I've been throughout the prison. I've been in the dining halls and on all the tiers, all the cell blocks, the yards. I have a very good understanding of what it's like in San Quentin and what it means to sentence a person to prison. Ideally, you want to restore the victim of a crime. You want to restore the offender to his or her community so that families aren't broken up. And incarceration is one of the tools, unfortunately, that judges have to use in order to accomplish those goals.
Okay, I think we're going to go into our last question here. So tell me, we'll start with you, Mike. What do you think the court system needs in Marin? Are there any upgrades that you would be in support of, or what do you feel the court system is in need of at the moment?
Okay. Well, there's a couple things I would say. On the civil side, we should have an electronic filing system so that lawyers don't have to actually physically come to the courthouse to file papers in court. Many places across California have an electronic filing system where you can do it electronically. That would certainly make things easier on many of the parties. When I first got to Marin County, I had been working in Lake County, which is a much smaller place, fewer judges, but a whole lot of cases because there's a lot of poverty and crime there. And I found that the system in Marin was very inefficient when it came to resolving criminal cases. And what I mean by that is that people charged with just routine rather low-level misdemeanors were coming back to court time and time again and making sometimes as many as a dozen appearances even before they got to trial. And that was a result of an inefficiency that I think could be improved. And it had a lot to do with the communication between criminal defense attorneys and the DA's office. And frankly, the public are consumers of our court system. They're the ones that are essentially the customers. And they ought to be treated better when it comes to doing justice than having to come back time and time again, taking time off from their jobs or their lives, or leaving kids at home. So I would suggest that that's one thing that could be improved. I also think that in general, the criminal calendars could be run better, and I've talked about this with the sheriff's deputies. When in-custody defendants are brought down to court, they have to come into the courtroom one by one for security reasons. But I believe that that system could be improved because often judges and lawyers and family members are waiting around for long periods of time for a particular defendant to be brought into the courtroom. And I think that that function could be improved so that defendants could be brought into the courtroom more quickly after their cases are called.
Thank you. Sheila?
Sure, and I touched upon this a little earlier. One of the things that really concerns me, as I mentioned before, is the fact that we have a growing senior population here in Marin County, and that many of the seniors are house rich and cash poor, and when it comes to the legal system. There are so many ways in which I get concerned because of the things that I see, not just as a deputy county counsel at the County of Marin, but also as a judge pro tem. And that is really elder abuse. In my capacity as judge pro tem, I've had to hear cases where we've had children of parents or the parents themselves coming and filing complaints against people who were supposed to take care of them. Who instead, they alleged were taking their money, taking their jewelry, drugging them. And so those are things that are really concerning, and I think it's something that we need to pay attention to. I've also had to deal with that in my capacity, as I said, as a deputy county counsel, working with the district attorney's office and other entities in the county. And so, in my thinking, what can we do? What can we do to address those problems? Not only that, but we're also going to see an increase in probate courts. How can we be ready for that? And as I mentioned, the Legal Self-Help Services Center that we have, which is housed in Marin County, really currently only deals with family law. So I would like to see that expanded. What I'm also doing is talking to our Marin County Bar Association, because they're going to start a sort of a legal aid once a month type of clinic in the law library to see if we can expand the knowledge of those who are serving to deal with temporary restraining orders, to deal with some of the issues that could come up that seniors might need help in drafting.
Thank you. That ends the question portion of this debate. Before the candidates make their closing statement, we wanted to give you some important dates. Election Day is Tuesday, November 8th. Please vote. If you wish to register to vote, or if you've moved since the last time you voted and you want to re-register, the deadline is Tuesday, October 25th. Requests for absentee ballots must be received by the registrar of voters no later than Friday, October 28th, and early voting begins on Monday, October 24th at the Civic Center in room 121. If you go to the League's votersedge.org website, which is VOTERSEDGE, and enter your street address and zip code, you'll be able to see your own ballot. In addition, you'll find a link to the candidates, the issues, the ballot measures, and information about the voting process itself. Now, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement, and we'll begin with Sheila Lichtblau, followed by Mike Caffino.
Thank you, and thank you, California Women League of Voters, for providing me with this opportunity to talk about some of my qualifications. As I mentioned at the beginning of this program, I am somebody who really brings multiple perspectives because we really need to have a judge who can provide a balanced and a fair view when that judge is on the court. Sonia Sotomayor, who is a current U.S. Supreme Court Justice, says that mastery of the law is insufficient without an understanding as to how it affects the lives of every single individual. And really what that means is the more perspectives you have, the more you see things not in black and white, but in technicolor. And that's the balance, and that's the perspective that I bring, not a particular one, but really multiple perspectives, because that's how you get a judge who can really listen to everybody, who has that broad-based understanding. As I mentioned at the beginning of the program, I'm a child of immigrant parents. My father is from India, and my mother is from Puerto Rico. I grew up speaking Spanish. I am a Bay Area native, but I've also lived abroad. And in my own personal diversity that I bring, I really have had the opportunity to have a rich upbringing that really gives and adds to those multiple perspectives that I think is just so necessary. Additionally, my professional life is very diverse in terms of the types of clients I've represented. Several years representing poor and disabled individuals, where I was the Spanish-speaking attorney for the community in Richmond, California during the height of the crack epidemic, with mentally and physically disabled individuals, small and large businesses, governmental entities, schools. All of that is so important to make sure that we have a judge who is balanced. But then most important on top of that, I bring judicial experience, which is so key in this election. We want a judge who actually plays the role not only of an attorney, but who actually has to sit there and be the neutral and weigh credibility and weigh evidence and make those hard decisions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. I hope to some extent it's been fun for both of us. And Justice Sonia Sotomayor is an interesting example. She is unique on the U.S. Supreme Court because she grew up in public housing in New York City. And when she became a lawyer, she started her career in the Manhattan DA's office, working as a kind of frontline DA handling trials in the trial court. These are very unique experiences that she has on the court. And she herself, Sonia Sotomayor, has called for the nomination to the court of a criminal defense attorney because, as she has pointed out, the U.S. Supreme Court has many justices who spent their careers as attorneys general and as prosecutors, but nobody currently on the U.S. Supreme Court who worked as a criminal defense attorney. And we have a similar imbalance here in Marin County. Now, Sotomayor is interesting for another reason as well, which is that her experiences growing up in public housing in New York and working as a trial-level DA, handling cases at the kind of granular level that you see in the trial courts, gives her a very unique perspective that she gave voice to in a dissent recently in a case out of Utah, in which a man was arrested without a warrant or any other probable cause or reasonable suspicion, which was unlawful, but he had a warrant. And this was a minority. And Sotomayor, in dissenting from a case which found that despite that this detention of the individual was unlawful, that the warrant could still be relied upon by the authorities, she said, people don't have an understanding unless they're minorities or unless they've been on the streets and been in these communities, what it's like to have encounters with the police. As a public defender, I see the criminal justice system from the street level point of view of my clients, in addition to the kind of removed point of view that I have as somebody with a law background and a kind of academic interest in the law. It's ironic to think that a white male like me could add diversity to our court, but it's true. Because at this point, we have no judge who has had the career and experiences that I've had, and I would hope to bring that as a valuable perspective to our bench. Thank you so much for having us.
Well, thank you to both of our candidates and to Annie Laser as our timekeeper. And thank you for watching.